Extremely creepy story time on how my aunt passed away. So a little background information. About 5 years ago, my aunt had gotten pregnant. It was really weird because a few months before she got pregnant, the doctor told her that she would never be able to have kids. And her husband had been trying for years. Well, I think like 2 weeks after the baby was born, it had passed away. And I don't really know why. For some reason, my mom won't tell me. Which is weird, but anyways, after that, my aunt just felt like a lot of things weren't going the way that she wanted them to in her life. So she decided to get closer with God. Well, every Sunday night, we go to my grandparents' house for a family dinner. And while we were there, my aunt starts going on this whole rampage. She said that God's not giving her the answers that she needs, and I don't really know what she means by answers. So my grandparents kick her out because she's acting like a psycho. Well, the same night at 3 a.m. in the morning, we hear a knocking on the door. And lo and behold, it's my aunt. So my mom lets her in because she feels bad and feels like she's the only one that will actually listen to my aunt. So she makes everybody sit at the kitchen table. And she pulls out a Ouija board from her bag. So like I said, she makes us all sit down at the kitchen table and she pulls out a Ouija board. She was like, I found out how I can get some answers. I just feel like I need you guys around me for positive energy. And my family is very, very religious. Like, we don't fuck with that shit. Because my mom felt bad for her, she let her use it in our house. But my mom didn't want my sisters and I around that, so she just sent us to bed. Well, the next morning, I wake up and I ask my mom what happened with the Ouija board situation. My mom just said that it was really scary, because before she thought it was like a load of bullshit, and she said that her and my dad didn't touch the Ouija board, because like I said, they were very religious and did not mess with that stuff. But apparently, it said for her not to buy a house with the numbers 2815. Well, 2 years later, my aunt got remarried, and her husband ended up having 2 kids. So they bought a new house, and no, it didn't have the numbers on it. One of their kids accidentally shattered the glass door, so they went and got a new one, and it came with those exact numbers on it. 2 days later, the house burnt down and nobody survived. Storytime about the time that I was kidnapped. I would just like to add in an extreme trigger warning. So a little background information. I was 16 at the time, and my 2 friends invited me to a birthday party. It was this girl and her boyfriend. They said that it was in the south side and not a lot of people were going to be there. So we go to the guy's house who's throwing the party and nobody's there except for him. And at first he was being really nice. I asked where everybody was and they were like, oh, they're going to show up later. While my friends were sitting on the couch, they start making out for like an hour straight. And this guy, who we're going to call Jeremy, he keeps going in and out of the front door. Well, my friends asked the guy if they could go to the bathroom and he goes, yeah, it's just around back. And at this point, they are gone for an hour. So now I'm super freaked out and I'm thinking of all the ways that I could possibly get out of this house. So I ask if I can use the bathroom. So he leads me to the backyard, which is through this alleyway, and it's pretty much fenced in by like brick buildings. So when we're back there, I'm like, where's the bathroom? And he points down to a bucket. So like I said, he leads me to the backyard. When I ask where the bathroom is, he points at a bucket sitting in the middle of the yard. So I'm about to do my business and he's literally staring at me. And I'm like, can you not watch me? And he turns around. But he's still literally standing there. So at this point, I had a plan that whenever we got out of that alley, I was just going to start running. Well, that didn't go according to plan. Because as soon as we got out of that alleyway, he grabs me by my hair and drags me into the house. So right now, I'm super scared. I'm thinking, where the hell are my friends at? Well, then he says, we're going to play a game. So at this point, I'm just going along with everything because I want to make it out of this alive. So he puts a screwdriver in this lock in the front door. And then he makes me turn around and count to 15 and then turn back around. When I turned back around, he was standing there naked with a pair of leather gloves on. And at this point, I'm thinking that my friend set me up. Anyways, he punches me in the face, knocking me out cold. I woke up later to him choking me while I'm laying on the floor. But like I said, he had punched me in the face, knocking me out cold. And when I woke up, he was choking me while I was laying on the floor. And he says, you're gonna do whatever I say or I'm gonna kill you. And just to prove it to you, he starts choking me in this weird way where I literally am coming in and out of consciousness. Apparently, if you choke somebody a certain way, they can literally pass out. So I said, I'll do whatever he said. And that's whenever he forced me to take off all my clothes. For the next 5 days, I had been sexually assaulted repeatedly and had no food or water. 1 minute he would be completely fine and then the next he would act like a psycho. He would be like, nobody loves me, I'm the spawn of Satan, I'm Satan's child. Just a lot of off the wall shit. So I started using reverse psychology on him. He said my own mother doesn't love me, and I was like, well, I love you. Fast forward, the 5th day was the worst day. He was constantly beating me. He had thrown me on the floor. I was begging for food. I still had no clothes on. You will never guess what he did next. So like I said, 5th day the worst. I'm begging for food. He's beating me constantly. So he made me sit on the couch next to him, and he opens a can of cat food. I was so hungry at this point, it did not matter what it was. Well, he went into one of his episodes, and he threw a space heater at my head. I woke up and I was laying on my back on the ground and I could barely open my eyes. They were like swollen shut. I could see a little bit, and when I looked down, I saw that both of my hands had been broken completely. Like every single bone. Well, my parents, who had been on drugs at the time, never bothered to look for me for those few days. Well, that morning, apparently, my mom had this weird gut feeling that they needed to find me. So she told my dad, we need to find Christina. So they had been out looking for me, and they saw this guy that was one of my friends. And he pretty much says, you better tell me where Christina is or I'm calling the cops on all of you. So they had told my dad that the house right next door was where I was at. So he went and knocked on the neighbor's door. And they said, well, we've been hearing screaming next door all week. So like I said, my dad knocked on the door of the house that was right next to the one that I was in. They were like, oh, well, we've been hearing screaming next door all week. My dad's like, why the hell wouldn't you call the cops? And they were like, oh, because he throws a lot of parties. So while I'm laying on the floor, I hear my dad at the door. And the door's open just a crack, so that way my dad wouldn't see me, of course. Well, through the crack, my dad saw my legs laying on the floor. So my mom and dad forced their way into the house. Mind you, I'm still laying on the floor naked. And the guy who kidnapped me literally pulled out this big-ass knife. My dad grabbed this dog chain that was on the floor, wrapped it around this guy's neck, and was like trying to choke him. Fast forward, the police pull my dad off. And as I'm in the ambulance, the cops had said that they had found another girl in the house. She was upstairs chained to the wall, and he was sexually assaulting her, and she was pregnant. But the child inside of her was dead, and if they would have found her a week later, she probably would have been dead. Because this happened back then, they weren't able to put him in jail for a long time. So it turns out that he had sexually assaulted multiple women. But like I said, because it was a long time ago, they weren't really able to put him in jail as long as they wanted to. So they pretty much based the case around the baby who had died in this situation. Well, during this time, he ended up getting out on bail, and he tried committing suicide. He shot himself in the stomach, but he still lived. And after that, he ended up doing a little more than 20 years. A lot of the women that he had assaulted still didn't get their justice. And I had tried looking for the girl who was there in the house, but nobody could find her. Well, I want to say in 2006, I was in a thrift store with my husband, and as I was going in, I saw him walking out, and I literally was so scared, like, just looking at him literally, like, paralyzed me. And he looked back at me like he knew exactly who I was. So I told my husband that we had to hurry up and get out of there, and after that, I never saw him again. Story time about how my dad was on the news and now everybody knows my last name. So a little background information. This all happened whenever I was in 6th grade. This all happened on a Tuesday night. So I had school the next day. Well, my dad had went to work earlier in the day. Well, around 10 o'clock at night, we hadn't heard from my dad all day, which was super weird for him because he was always home around 10 o'clock. And even if he wasn't, he still would have kept in contact with us and let us know where he was at. So at this point, my family and I were really scared, and we're thinking that something happened to him. I was calling and texting him, my mom was calling and texting him. My whole family was pretty much trying to get a hold of him. Like, we had called all the hospitals to see if he was there. We called police stations to see if he might have been in jail or if they had his last name in the system. So nobody had heard or seen from him. So we all went to sleep that night hoping that he would show up in the morning. So the next day after I got home from school, my mom came home from work and she had told me about this phone call that she got. So like I said, my mom had gotten home from work and she told me about this phone call that she got while she was at work. So apparently one of her coworkers called her and said, hey, I think I saw your husband on the news. So after that, she showed me the news article and I couldn't even believe what I was reading. So I guess my dad had been drinking and he went to an auto repair shop and stole a car because I guess the keys were left in the door of the car. And what makes this even worse, the car that he stole had 2 guns in the trunk. And they weren't 2 pistols. These were 2 big ass guns that were fucking loaded. Oh wait, I forgot something. So before this, he had been at the strip club. And somehow he ended up in pink lingerie. Guys, I cannot make this shit up. So he was driving around and he decided to park right in the middle of an intersection. And it was literally causing a whole fucking scene. There were people with their kids worried as hell. So after that, a few people called the cops. So like I said, my dad parked in the middle of an intersection and people were calling the cops. So when the police arrived, my dad was half passed out in the car. This happened in like the middle of broad day. Like there's traffic everywhere. So when they finally get up to the car, my dad is literally slumped in the driver's seat. There was a bottle of whiskey in the door and it was completely empty. When they went to arrest him, he started resisting. He was screaming a bunch of profanities at them and started kicking them, threatening them with guns. which made the situation worse because my dad had no clue that there were any guns in the back of the car. So that just made the police think that they were his. So they take my dad to jail and he has like 7 charges against him. But we were happy because we knew where he was. Well, the worst part is, so the next day when I went to school, people were coming up to me asking if that was my dad on the news. Some people were even making fun of me because of what he did. And that's really fucking embarrassing for a 12-year-old. But it's okay, Dad, I still love you.